to the erotic realm, where we explore the psychology of darker desires. I'm Em, and if you're new here, welcome. The Erotic Realm podcast has been growing rapidly, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all of you, especially those joining us from Substack. Whether you've been here with me from the beginning or just stepping into this world, I'm thrilled to have you here. This podcast is an extension of my work at Psychology of Desire, where I dive into the science and symbolism of the erotic mind. Here, we move beyond surface-level discussions of kink and sexuality. We explore the why behind our desires. Each episode, we step inside the erotic realm of someone who has ventured into these deeper, sometimes darker spaces. People who have found liberation, transformation, or even healing through their desires. By exploring the personal experiences of BDSM practitioners one by one, we break down the myth and dive into the reality of what it means to be a kinkster. So whether you're here out of curiosity, self-exploration, or a drive to understand the erotic mind on a deeper level, welcome. You're exactly where you need to be. Now, I've been mentioning on recent episodes that I had a project that I was about to launch, and I'm excited to announce not one, but two new projects with you today. The first project is the Erotic Realm Confessional. This is a live, on-location, mini version of this podcast. I dreamt up this idea and imagined taking the podcast to live kink events and interviewing kinksters while they are immersed in the kink world in a confessional style setup. I'm thrilled to announce that the Erotic Realm Confessional has been accepted to Oz Kink Fest in Melbourne this October, and I'll be setting up a private booth where kinksters can anonymously share insights into their erotic psychology. To make it happen, I'm raising funds for recording equipment, travel, and creating a beautiful, welcoming space. As a thank you for donating, your name will go on the confessional wall at the event, and you'll be personally thanked in a special episode recorded live from the festival. If this is a project that excites you and you'd love to be a part of it, you can find the donation link in the show notes. The second project I'm sharing with you today answers the question: have you ever wondered if you have similar erotic dreams to other people? Well, we're about to find out with the Deep Desire Project. The Deep Desire Project is a global research archive collecting erotic dreams and fantasies to map the inner terrain of desire across cultures and identities. I'm super excited about this as it brings together my background in sleep science with my love for erotic psychology. So in short, this project aims to be the largest archive of erotic dreams in the world. If you'd like to be part of it, go to psychologyofdesire.com or visit my Substack, Psychology of Desire. I've also left a link to the project in the show notes below. And lastly, before we dive into the episode, just a quick note that the erotic realm is growing rapidly right now. If you're a brand or business in the US that's aligned with kink, sex positivity, or erotic psychology, I'm currently seeking American sponsors for upcoming episodes. And now, let's jump into today's erotic realm. The following is a conversation with Magdalena, a leather woman, sacred sexuality practitioner, and top-leaning switch, whose erotic journey has been deeply shaped by sex magic, shadow integration, and the transformative power of kink. She is also the first lesbian leatherwoman that I've had the honour of interviewing on the erotic realm, bringing a powerful perspective on female supremacy, queer spirituality, and erotic surrender. In this episode, we explore what it means to approach BDSM not just as play, but as a profound path of personal evolution. Magdalena shares how her leather identity, sacred sexuality practice, and devotion to feminine power have shaped her erotic realm, and also how BDSM became a form of Jungian shadow work and soul reclamation. We talk about power, surrender, altered states, and why hesitation at the edge of submission can be the most potent moment of all. Enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have with me Magdalena. Welcome, Magdalena.
Thank you so much. Hello.
Hi. So, at the request of listeners, I've recently added a new regular question to the beginning of the podcast. Listeners have requested to get to know a bit more about the person I'm interviewing outside of kink. So, we would love to know, what are your interests outside of kink, whether that be your general work area, if you're happy to share, or your hobbies, or both? Basically, what are you up to when you're not being a kinkster?
Oh, wonderful. That's a great question. I am a mother and grandmother. I work in I am 51 years of age. I work in a dermatology clinic as a registration receptionist. So
Mm-hmm.
I check people in for their phototherapy appointments. And I very enjoy crafting and homesteading and camping and women's festivals. Those are some of my hobbies.
Okay, fascinating. Thanks for sharing.
You're
So,
welcome.
yeah, let's dive into your sexuality now. If you had to describe it, how would you describe your sexuality?
I am a Midwestern American femme lesbian sex magician, and I
Oh.
understand it's a mouthful. And we could probably drill down into every one of those, but I live in
Please.
the Midwest America, Midwest of the United States. Femme as a gender expression, and femme as a queer identity. Lesbian again as a queer identity. I am a woman-loving woman, and sex magician both describes sort of my orientation in community, and it's important to me in terms of my identity. So that's who I am in 7 or 8 words. My kinks are sexual, physical, and mental and energetic, and they've evolved so much over my 20-year journey in the world of kink, BDSM, and power exchange. And I really came to understand myself as a vehicle for the divine in dungeons. One of the things that I find so liberating about participating in these spaces is how we embrace the journey and how we're encouraged to utilize dungeons in really creative ways. Like a scene which is sort of like forced appreciation. I watched a woman of size have words of affirmation scrawled on her body with like paint markers
Mm.
and bathtub markers, right? You're beautiful. I'm worthy. I am, I am joy. I am love. I am light. Things like that while she was restrained and blindfolded and not able to see who wrote these positive messages on her skin. Right, being quote unquote tortured with positive affirmation.
Mhm.
Um, I was really intrigued by watching these two primal, toppy top, both very like men of size take each other on and take each other down in another dungeon setting. And so like the elasticity and the creativity of these spaces to do whatever we want to do and be who we want to be and show up either in a more authentic version of ourselves or a playful sort of like I'm just putting this on for the evening or just for the scene. I love that part of
Mm.
the scene. So
Mm.
um, it's a wide open space with enough safeguards for us to encourage true exploration of ourself and our relationships. My erotic landscape is varied. I don't want to get too deep into the questions. Let me pause. Oh
Please
my
go.
gosh.
No, go for
This
it.
is all to
This is
answer to your first
fascinating.
point. My erotic landscape is varied and diverse and large. Some of the themes that I've noticed are subverting a popular narrative, men in, excuse me, frog in my throat, men in services of service and adoration to women, fucking with gender,
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual transformation, BDSM as an altered state of consciousness. I came to the world of BDSM on a sobriety journey. And before I was a sober person, I was super into psychedelics. And
Right.
so BDSM as an altered state of consciousness, like, wait a minute, I can just breathe
Mm-hmm.
or be very present in my body and feel high. That was like winning the lottery, right? Um, Shadow work, catharsis, and testing oneself is another theme that I've noticed. Politics and how they impact the kinkster, and then down to the body, fisting, edging, and orgasm control, breath control, rough body play, sensory play, and woo magic and energetic exchange. So,
Okay, amazing. There's so much to
a lot,
unpack there. I want to go back
right?
to the beginning of your kink journey. You mentioned it was something to do with your sobriety journey. How were you first introduced to kink? Was it through a friend? Did you go to an event? What was that like?
So I'm a bit of a punk rock kid. I'm, Gen X. And I knew of sadomasochists in the goth and punk bars back
Mm,
in my early, like late teens and early 20s, right? But I was still judgmental enough to be like, oh, people who like to hurt each other in the bedroom, they're weird and gross and they should stay over there.
mm-hmm.
Um, and and it was, later in life when I got a little more cultural awareness, I did find bondage.com and started to go to munches and get-togethers and meet people. And one of the things that I found really empowering was that they were sober spaces. Was that it was not, playing under the influence was disencouraged
Mm,
and viewed as risky behavior, right? And so I really enjoyed that it was such a consent-based space, that you're not going to do anything that you don't, in an ongoing affirmative way agree to. My consent, my bodily autonomy will not be violated in these spaces. And so as I was learning to, exist in the world as a sober person, it was really important to me to have nightlife that didn't center on getting high.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the kink world was there for me in that way. And I really, sort of stayed around the fringes and the edges. I went to a lot of classes and I talked to a lot of people and I met a lot of people, but I didn't really dive into a lot of scening because that just wasn't where I was at. I was very curious about the space and used it to socialize more than I used it to explore. I came to understand what's going on here before I really, took my clothes off or agreed to a scene.
Mm-hmm. And you describe yourself as a top leaning switch. Is that the role that you started with, or has that evolved over time?
It's definitely evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
I saw myself as a submissive, and possibly even with aspirations of slavehood. So
Mm,
yes, no, it's certainly evolved over time.
mm-hmm. Okay, and you also describe yourself in the podcast form as a dyke and a leather woman. And you're the first dyke and leather woman that I've actually interviewed on the podcast. So
That's it.
I'm really keen for our listeners to understand your unique perspective. What's the one thing you wish people knew about being a dyke and or leather woman that you feel isn't spoken about enough or understood well within the BDSM or wider community?
Oh wow, that's a big question. Um, One thing that I want people to understand is that our kink and leather spaces today were won by the efforts, the labor, and indeed the activism of queer people, and often queer and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at the scene today, I see a lot of upper middle class white straight people, and that's the political piece that I spoke about in my introduction, is that like these spaces are inherently radical and are inherently queer. Um, And so as a dyke, I think, for me, I can't speak for all dykes everywhere, but certainly for me, there's a feminism component. There's an owning my space and owning my sexuality. I'm a woman loving woman in a patriarchy, in an increasingly autocratic society, in an increasingly, in a capitalist society. Showing up in a dungeon as a woman loving woman, I think, is subversive. And then you asked me about, can you restate the question just so I can remind, so I can make sure I hit all the
I was
points?
asking about what's one thing that you wish people knew about being a dyke and or leather woman that isn't spoken about in the BDSM or wider community?
Yeah. I think that we continue to struggle to have space.
Mm-hmm.
We continue to have play spaces that are dictated or that are for both women loving women and kinky women loving women, mm-hmm. right? And lesbians and dykes and queers in general. Most of the spaces are indeed dominated by straight folks, and I get it. The whole of society is kind of dominated, right? Like this is just a reflection of the overculture. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would just remind, I guess, kinksters at large that we would not have BDSM spaces if it weren't for gay men primarily, and a lot of the leather archivists are in fact women of color, lesbian women of color. And so like just sort of to remember our like brethren in kink and mm-hmm. our siblings in kink, that there's a space for us all here.
Beautiful. Can you speak to more about what a leather woman is? What do you embody as a leather woman?
To me, leather, wow, it's so ephemeral, right? Everybody gets to sort of make up their own mm-hmm. Definition of what leather means. To me, it's about living to a higher standard. To me, it's about sort of showing up in kink as a role model. Mm. It's about trying to, influence the culture and the parties in a positive way for the future of kink. It is taking it as a personal investment, not just coming to a party to see what sort of like scene I can have and then go home, pay my $35 to get in and have a couple of scenes and then go home. And that is how I approached the community for a long time. But once I realized I was really getting a lot out of these spaces, it was one of the things that I took from my recovery journey is that if you have benefited from a space, you now have assumed a bit of a debt of service and volunteering to that same space. Mm. And so I did take it as a duty, really, to give back to the kink and leather community in volunteering ways, right? And so even if I personally am not cruising, even if I'm, going through a chapter of celibacy, even if I don't have a giant appetite for BDSM or power exchange, I continue to stay connected to the community, and I continue to have an opinion and support these spaces with my money and with my voice. So
wonderful. And you've mentioned female supremacy in the podcast form as well. How do you define feminine or female supremacy in the context of kink, and what makes that dynamic feel sacred or powerful to you?
Well, I mentioned really that I have a kink for subverting a popular narrative, and the United States is definitely a patriarchal society. Women, make up 51% of the world, but we still don't have the voting and economic and et cetera, power. Mm-hmm. And so being in this sort of like special space of the dungeon, I see a lot of analogy. I see a lot of mirroring and symmetry between ritual space as a priestess and a magician and the scene that we set up to do kink and power exchange, right? We set a perimeter. We talk about what we want to do in the space. We make agreements a little bit like theater. We rehearse our roles a touch. We talk about what's going to happen in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And we're kind of after a certain outcome, just like ritual work and just like magic. And so to me, there's an inherent overlap of ritualism in doing BDSM. Because you have to come to it with your intent. You have to sort of know what you want out of the scene before you even begin, and sometimes before you begin the conversation. And the role that I think that gender plays there is, yes, as a woman, I make less money. Yes, as a woman, even though it's against the law, that doesn't mean it's completely culturally frowned upon for me to, lose economic opportunities, for me to be subject to discrimination, right? And I say all of those things even as a white lesbian, right? If I had more melanin in my skin, there would be more of that in my life. So right, there's a social justice component of it to me. And yeah, so I don't know. I think that the space is really powerful to explore who you are, and it turns me on to have men subservient to me, right? When I began to change my own mind about who I am in the kink community, and understand myself more as somebody who likes to hold power and call the shots rather than somebody who would rather be on the other side of the slash. I was with a really hard, masculine lesbian dyke, not quite a gold star lesbian, as in someone who's never touched men, but damn close, right? Heavy boots wearing, worked in the trades, I mean, sort of a stereotypical lesbian. And she had been in the leather community for a long time and was also indigenous. And so I learned a lot about, land sovereignty and things of this nature in that relationship. And so, I think that the way that we live our lives outside of the dungeon absolutely influences how we show up in the dungeon and vice versa. And this too is symmetrical with my magical practice, as above, so below, as within, so without. So
beautiful. I'd love to get more into the magical stuff a bit later. For now, I want to hear more about the female supremacy that you're speaking about. So one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring a quote's meaning with you. And today's quote is from William Marston, who was a psychologist, lawyer, and the creator of Wonder Woman. But what many people don't know is that he was also deeply fascinated by power, submission, and feminine supremacy. So he developed the disc theory of human behaviour, which explored dominance and submission, concepts that are incredibly relevant to BDSM dynamics today. And he believed that submission to a loving authority, particularly a strong woman, was the key to harmony and progress. So his personal life reflected back these beliefs. He lived in a polyamorous relationship with 2 women, both of whom inspired Wonder Woman's character. His comics were filled with themes of bondage, surrender, and erotic power. So his work was a fascinating intersection of psychology, feminism, and kink. The quote from William Marston I want to ask you about is, "Gone is the Pollyannish view that women are the source and fountain of masculine virtue, their birthright and destiny, therefore, justifying masculine authority and supremacy." So in this quote, he's challenging traditional gender roles, thereby questioning male authority and supremacy. How does this perspective resonate with your views on female supremacy within the BDSM community? And how have you seen these dynamics play out in your own experiences?
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't know that much about the author of Wonder Woman. I just know that was, there were, I grew up in the 70s and there were play pajama sets, play nighttime wear that you could have. And my Wonder Woman underwear were my very favorite, right? When I was 6. And I love the Linda Carter version. So
Hmm.
that's really, really wonderful history for me.
Hmm.
Um, and as a poly person, we haven't even delved into my non-monogamy
No.
the non-monogamy components of who and how I operate in the kink community. But like, that's fantastic. He also was a bit of a pioneer in that way,
Hmm.
being published as a non-monogamous. Um, so that's great. I think that the way that I see female supremacy and male submission here in the United States often looks like clothed female, nude male type parties. Um, I enjoy it. I love to see a man clothed or otherwise in a role of, yes, indeed, like devotion and servitude, and subtracting the humiliation. I know that a lot of straight guys come at it with this space of like, I am small, I am a worm, I am a dog. And I really like, you are a king, right? You are a fully grown man who is choosing to bow your head. And that's really gorgeous, right? As gorgeous as it was for me as a mouthy, loud femme to bend my head before anybody, right? An empowered choice is really lovely.
Hmm.
So, yeah, and today I identify as a top leaning switch, and today it does bring me a lot of erotic power to subvert the masculine, even within my lesbian relationship. Although my wife would never identify as a submissive, we certainly have a power orientation in the home where I'm the boss, and so like it shows up in my life in other ways, and what else
Mm.
can I say about it?
I'm fascinated by your journey from considering being a slave to now being a top leaning switch. Was that a gradual shift that you saw in your psychology, or was there a particular moment where you felt that switch happen? What was that journey like?
Yeah, so it was a bit compartmentalized. I learned about sacred sexuality a handful of years into my kink journey. I learned that it really wasn't, the nuts and bolts, the flogging and the rope bondage and the all of the accoutrements that go along with kink. That really wasn't where it was at for me. It wasn't necessarily about role play, although I do love to play dress up. It wasn't about like, being a baby girl. It wasn't about, being a hajira and holding poses, or groveling a whole lot, right? And when I finally put my finger on that this is about trying to reach an altered state of consciousness
Mm.
without drinking or drugging, right? That the flogger has the ongoing message of now, the moment is now. The moment is now. And when I realized that I was using kink as either a way to get further into my body or to explore something that was bothering me in my life, I used it often just as an expression, the way that I was using sex to sort of like discharge physical stress and, work it out on the dance floor, work it out in the dungeon, either by being pummeled or pummeling someone else. And so certainly the journey was gradual,
Hmm.
but the energy piece, I decidedly have to, right? I am a conduit for this healing, universal energy that comes through me. And so in a way, you have to set your own ego aside and sort of put yourself in the back seat for what wants to come through and what needs to be channeled for the body that you're working on. And then also there is a piece of like, I am the priestess here. I am the capital P priestess here. This is my table. This is my space. This is my energy. This is my scene, right? And so learning to hold the tension of that, of being selfless and sort of putting my ego and my identity and my flashiness, because I can be a very ostentatious person, Right, and putting that sort of aside in order to do work that is for the benefit of this body on the table, which very much, right, I was invested in doing a good job for that. And I wanted to do that right and do that ethically and do that true. And so I had to really, I came to understand that energy work is a thing that you do by feel, right? That you can't just sit down and read a book and ta-da, you're a Reiki master. You have to get in the sandbox and get dirty and learn to do it from within. And so learning to hold that tension of both like being selfless and being the priestess, guarding the space around me and my seeker was really important.
So let's chat more about the psychology behind your dominant self. You
Okay.
wrote, things get very exciting for me when they begin to hesitate or to surrender. That's such a potent moment. What does that hesitation evoke for you as a dom?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's right out there in my profile. I talk about
Mm-hmm.
things don't get fun for me until you're at the very edge of your yes. Because edges excite me. I can be an ostentatious and a loud person, and I can be somebody who, in my younger and more reckless years, was like a thrill seeker, right? I took dangerous. I would make more dangerous choices. And today in the dungeon, I can play with that emotional edge of, are you sure you really mean that? Yes. Are you sure you still want to give me that power? Are you sure you still trust me? That's very exciting to me. And so playing with that edge has the same erotic power as orgasm control, as breath control. That shit's super exciting.
So do you believe that this erotic tension, building it up, is a gateway to personal transformation?
Absolutely, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
It can also just be a fun way to spend a Tuesday, right? I think you can use it that way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know what you've learned about yourself, mentally or spiritually, through inflicting pain or controlling surrender.
So, I mean, I grew up in a home that was, physically punitive, right? I was hit by my father. I was, right? And so, like, I had a story about myself that I was a wimp, that I
Mm,
couldn't take pain, that I wasn't, I was so afraid of being struck that I avoided it for a long time. And um, so consenting to a scene where I'm going to be, pain will be inflicted upon my body, that in itself was a journey. And I learned something about myself. And then, you feel a little bit more powerful and you take bigger risks in terms of, okay, what can the next narrative about myself that I can subvert? What can that look like in the dungeon? And so that was probably the first 5 or 10 years of my journey. And then when I met my ex that I was describing, who was, very masculine and indigenous, she too was a ritualist and involved in spirituality and was a sun dancer. And so absolutely had that component of like sacralizing a,
mm,
a scene and indeed, right, aligning it with the seasons, aligning it with the right astrology, aligning it, using the element of fire. And I had begun to read authors like Barbara Carrellis, urban tantra. I had begun to look into Eastern, concepts of suffering. What does
mm,
suffering really mean? But it means to undergo something, right? And I had started to really unpack, what does it mean to stay present? What does it mean to surrender? What does it mean to, and obviously none of these were brand new concepts to me in recovery, right? Every day we surrender to life on life's terms when we're trying to get clean or stay clean. And so the concept of sort of like giving up my power and simultaneously stepping into my power as a priestess, as an energy worker, as a healer, and as somebody with really a gift for the sacred sexuality piece of it, of building up of energy, and holding that sort of container, that bubble, until you want to release it, and playing with those edges is not only like fun for me, but I really have a knack for it, right? And so that's, you know, when you find your flow, when you find there's a I think it's a Japanese term for when you find, right, the things that the world needs, and the things that you're great at, and the things that also bring you joy. If I could also get paid to do it, right, I could find my perfect career. So
that's a really powerful share. Thank you for that. So in our exploration of the intersections between eroticism and psychology, I'd like to delve into a subject which is thoroughly explored in the fascinating book, The Deep Psychology of BDSM and Kink, Jungian and Archetypal Perspectives on the Soul's Transgressive Necessities, which is a mouthful, but this book investigates how engaging in BDSM activities can act as a conduit for confronting and integrating the shadow aspects of our psyche, leading to profound personal transformation. So given your insights into BDSM as a form of shadow work, I'm really eager to hear your perspectives on this.
Yeah, so how exciting.
Yeah.
I wish I'd read the book as preparation for our interview.
No, that's okay. It's a big book to read. It's really full on. I'm also wanted to ask your perspective on Jungian shadow work. So
I was just going to say that's a very like sort of Jungian perspective, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So can you walk us through what shadow work is and how kink has helped you face the parts of yourself you were taught to repress?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I would love to. As a young girl growing up, obviously I was, you know, it was the 70s in America, and expressions of sexuality as women, we had just gone through the equal rights movement, or the ERA and the birth control and the pill, and so we just had a sexual revolution. But the way that media portrayed women in the 70s was still like somewhere on the spectrum of, you know, Madonna whore, and is still not a sort of like one or two dimensional, not really whole people. With a story unto themselves. And so that was certainly confining as a young woman trying to understand myself. And, you know, I touched on it before, you know, in the last question, that there's a paradoxical relationship there of like, you know, being selfless and simultaneously stepping into your power. And I think that shadow work has that same sort of paradoxical thing, catharsis, if used in the same way, right? I got to reading the people who were simultaneously kinky and pagan, right? Kinky and doing energy work and being magical, right, in their lives, and often polyamorous as well. Raven Caldera, Lee Harrington, both of those are trans folks who, in essence, debated with one another via a book. They both wrote their competing theories on the eightfold path to shadow work in the dungeon, and how to utilize, you know, the body, the mind, your emotions. One of the books talks about having a sort of a ritualistic death, right? And so the things that we do in the dungeon are so similar to the things that cultures have been doing for a super long time to meet God and to talk to God, and or goddess, or to worship the seasons, or to celebrate rites of passage, right? To commemorate a passage from like boyhood into manhood, right? These ritualistic uses of pain and trial and endurance have been used in sacred ways. And I started to ask that question, what could that look like in my life? And I still had and have today a lot of anger at society, right? And where better to take that out in the dungeon, either in a catharsis way to let rage out of my body by being pummeled or pummeling another person, or just being around the thumping music and laughing all night long, and hanging out with the leather men and smoking cigars, right? Like all of these have their place. In healing and sort of offsetting existing in the world today. And but the scene component of sort of like throwing myself up against an obstacle and seeing what stuck. An ex-girlfriend of mine was the one who put language to that. She was like, you use BDSM in this way. You are an ordeal path person. You enjoy the catharsis of asking a lot out of yourself, possibly more than you can do, like a daredevil, right? Except it isn't for fun or ego or for show. It's really like, it's important to you. It's therapeutic. It's revelatory. And I was like, wow, that's deep and also accurate. So.
Okay, so much there. Those books that you mentioned, I'll have to look those up. I haven't heard of them. They sound incredible. I'm curious to hear, can you share a specific experience where BDSM served as a mirror to parts of yourself you hadn't fully acknowledged before, where it showed you your shadow?
I thought you were going to ask me for a different example of a way that I use BDSM to sacralize something in my spiritual path.
Oh, you can talk to that if you prefer.
Okay. Awesome. I have had a relationship with the goddess Lilith, who is renowned feminist, outspoken, much like myself, and resonated just a lot with her myth and her story. And the energy group where I was sort of the sandbox where I was learning by feel how to give and receive energy. And all of the folks, like it was a Fet Life group. I found the people at the energy group on Fet Life. It was a gathering of kinky people. And for a good year and a half, I was asking myself, why am I finding my church in effect with all of the perverts, right? Like, what is happening right now? But it was, if it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so I kept going back, and it met the acid test of I felt better going out than I did going in. And that was sort of the rule and the yardstick that I used for much of my recovery and much of my sobriety journey. If it feels good and it's sober and it's safe, we're going to keep doing it. And so the Lilith components had come through, and I really wanted a scene where I could sort of devote my suffering to Lilith and really commemorate my relationship with her. And I had an ex-girlfriend of mine with me at the base of a tree on a full moon, and to the point of drawing blood, because to me it was important to speak in a language that old gods would understand. And I thought that blood probably hit that mark. And yeah, so surrounded by the folks that I did, energy work with on a monthly basis, we got together and we had this scene about Lilith at sundown, right? And we began by connecting and breathing and engaging in sort of an energy bath with the white sage smudge. And and it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. So, that there was obviously BDSM components to it, but it was a lot more about my spiritual journey in that moment. But we wouldn't have been able to do what we did without our kink tools and our BDSM language and all the things that we had learned by being, in the BDSM community. So.
I wanted to ask you more about your sacred sexuality side in a moment, but I had one more question about the shadow self. What advice would you offer to someone who's interested in using BDSM as a means to engage with their shadow self?
Are there, lessons or narratives in your life that you feel are holding you back? And how could you orchestrate a scene to release that?
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks.
Really well said. Perfectly said. So you identify as both a Dakini and I'm not sure how to pronounce the other one.
Kadishti.
Kadishti?
Yes.
Okay. I'm so curious. I've heard of Dakini before, but not Kadishti. Can you share with us what both of these are and what they mean for you?
For sure. I'll take Kadishti first. Sometimes that is a Kaddish too, with a U at the end. This is a path of sacred sexuality that I learned about from some practitioners here in Ohio. Dan and Dawn Williams put out the Erotic Awakening podcast, and they are leather title holders here in the Great Lakes region. And they were friends of friends when I was doing my energy work, sort of 101, my, wee baby energy worker exploration. And, so because they were friends of friends, I got to know their podcast. And because they were, a mere 2.5 hour drive away, I got to sort of hang out with them in community. And they also were on a sobriety journey. And so there was a lot of overlap there for what I was interested in. And Dawn Williams, they had a class called Path of the Kadishti. It's based on a deity by the name of Kadesh, also with the Q-A, or sometimes K, it is spelled Kadesh, an intersex or third sex gender, right, deity. Sometimes depicted hermaphroditically, or possessing genitals of both sexes. And so I thought that was, pretty radical. It also aligned with my understanding. Lilith is also, depicted as being a hooved woman or a hairy woman. And so some things that are, again, sort of like gender transgressive. And so I felt some resonance there with Kadesh, and it was just this concept of using your body to touch someone else's body in a way that is healing and gender affirming. And so we got to learn the very basics of what I would call energy hygiene, building energy, grounding energy, shielding energy, keeping energy out, bringing energy in, growing energy in your body through breath or meditation or focus. And then we would have, fun experiments in this energy group. So that is sort of like level 1 of Path of the Kadishti, is learning how energy works in your own body, and understanding sort of sacred sex 101. What does that look like? What are some of the concepts of sacred sexuality? There is no wrong way to have a body. Pleasure feels good. Sex feels good, and pleasure is good for you. Some of just the key and core concepts of modern sort of neo sacred sex, and what are people in the world doing with sacred sex today. And so that is Path of the Kadishti. And then in a practical way, we run as our graduation ceremony a Scarlet Sanctuary, where 2 givers engage in what we call sacred touch. And it's a ritualized process where, the seeker is disrobed. We ask you about your boundaries. Is there anywhere on your body you would prefer to not be touched? Is there anything, are you ticklish on the bottom of your feet? Things of this nature, so that we can it's really a lot of laying on of hands, right? I've seen other modalities call it ecstatic hands. But really just using your hands, and because there are 2 givers to one seeker, that asynchronous touch sort of puts somebody in a subspace-like space very quickly. And because you've approached them gently and they kind of know what they're in for, they know this is a soft and gentle scene. Hopefully they've come to your space pretty receptive, and allow that, right? Let you in an energetic way. And so that is Kadishti in a mouthful. Is this sort of like educational piece of like sacred sex 101, as well as learning the technique of sacred touch. Yeah. And once you know how energy works in your body and exploring that, then doing sacred touch in a like ritual setting.
So has learning this sacred sexuality allowed you personally to go deeper into altered states in a BDSM context? And
for sure.
If so, why do you think that is? What does it bring to the table?
Well, because practice, right? Practice makes better. And so if I had no interest in meditation before I found BDSM, which is not true, I already had an interest in Eastern practices and altered states of consciousness already, being someone who really enjoyed psychedelics, right? So I like the idea of sort of getting out of this reality and exploring other worlds or other perspectives. And so that I could achieve those states and better just through exploring my body and exploring my breath was very exciting to me, right? Finding ecstatic states through stillness and breath, or more cathartic experiences like flogging and, fucking and fisting. It was all pretty juicy. So it was a great time.
Sounds like it. Now, as part of our conversation today, I asked you to bring along something to share, such as a quote, book, or a movie that's influenced your sexuality. Can you share with us what you've brought along today and how it's helped shape your understanding of your erotic realm?
Yes. There is a series of books by the author Jacqueline Carey called Kushiel's Dart. And the Kushiel series is such an accurate reflection of my own sort of like sexual worldview. If only the world could be like in those books. There are 12 pleasure houses. Both prostitution is legalized, but also culturally accepted. It is and sacralized. Sex itself is sacralized, and the visiting of a pleasure house is done in accordance with the annual holidays, right? You have a birthday and you go to the pleasure house that meets the flavor of your erotic desires for the evening. And the novel follows a young girl who is unfortunately sold into sexual slavery. So there's ethical questions there, but she's sold by her own parents into one of these pleasure houses and is raised, and then goes on later to be a spy. And I won't, give away too much more of the novel because they're fantastic novels, but it's a wonderful description of the ways there is a sadism house, there's a masochism house, there is doing everything for the purity of the love in your heart. There's the innocence house. And so the sort of 12 different flavors of expressions of sexuality and eros. And it's a really gorgeous set of novels. And her journey as a spy for the realm goes on, I think, and then I think her children and her nephew, right? Because it's 9 novels that all explore this one central character. But she is a God-touched masochist. She is one of the few born in all of known history to subvert pain into sexual pleasure, and also is raised in the pleasure houses. And so in addition to becoming a spy of the realm and a big asset to her allies, she is also like a high class whore.
Mm-hmm.
She's a high class escort, so she demands a high price, and she gets really lovely gifts from her patrons, and it's a super juicy story.
Okay, I don't actually read fiction, but I think you might have sold me on that one. That sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. You've described yourself as becoming that which is becoming. Can you tell me more about what you mean by this?
I like to sound mysterious in my fat life profile.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that whenever I go to write a profile, I find it to be a bit limiting. As soon as I write down who I am right now, it's really just a snapshot, right?
Mm.
Because we are all just evolving. We're evolving over time. And who I am right now might not be how I want to show up in the dungeon tomorrow. And so, yeah, I think it's a reluctance to really box myself in. And so I am that which is becoming. I continue to evolve on my kink journey. There was, if you'd have asked me at the beginning of pandemic if I was at all interested in running for a leather title, I would have said absolutely not. And I'm in the last 30 days or so of my leather title as we speak now. So I just write, if I've learned nothing else in my kink journey, the things that turn me off today could very likely be my favorite fetish in 30 days. And so I just don't count on too much in terms of what we think we know. And I approach kink from a pretty self-aware place, and continue to like surprise myself.
Beautiful. Now, I'm in Australia. I don't know if we have leather titles here, not that I've heard of. Can you tell us more about what that means?
For me, there's a gay bar on the north side of Detroit in a place called Pontiac, and they ran a leather title. And so the origin of leather titles in America, I was told by my leather big sister, my leather mom, that it was a reason to get people to the bar and to sell beer, right? That it was just, gay men would come out in their leathers and do a little bit of a strut and show off their wares, as it were. And ta-da, you are Mr. Detroit Bar Leather 1998 or whatever. And there is, of course, more to it. There's lots of different sort of stripes of leather title that one can be. You can be a Mr. and Ms., like you can run for a title together as a couple. And then there are these sort of solo titles. You can be a leather boot black. The cohort that I'm going to the party with tonight is a current title holding boot black here in Detroit. And so there's lots of flavors, and boot blacking is, of course, taking care of the leather itself. And so you often, I don't know if you've been to a kink party where there is like a shoe shine stand.
Yep.
Those are boot blacks. And so leather can be lots of different things to different people, but remind me again what the question was. I feel like I'm getting a little off track.
That's okay. I was just asking you about the leather title. I also wanted to hear, you mentioned your last 30 days. What does that mean?
Oh, it was last April that I ran for Ms. Liberty Leather. And so Liberty Bar is the sponsoring bar. And so as Ms. Liberty Leather, it was my responsibility to host 2 events in the Detroit area over the last year. And we are talking about running another Ms. Liberty contest. Right. And so it had some of the, same legacy pieces as like standing and modeling, talking about what leather means to me, what I want for leather women and our community here in Detroit, and what I think our community needs, and things of that nature. And how would I respond to a consent injury was one of my interview questions. And so a lot like a pageant that you would think about, like right with Miss America or something like that. You are asked interview questions both in front of a panel and then in front of the bar with a microphone in your hand. So yeah,
Cool.
that's what the camp is like.
Wonderful. So before we dive into my next question, we have another tradition on the podcast where I ask the guest a question sourced by the listeners. So today's listener question is, do you prefer short-term versus long-term BDSM relationships, and why?
Well, that's a tough one. I think what I've had has been more short-term, although my preference is for medium to long-term.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it takes time to get to know each other, and it takes time to really establish that comfort and that rapport to do the edge play that I enjoy doing. And so, yeah, I prefer playing with people that I already know. And that's not to say that I can't have a great time with somebody that I've known 20 minutes. And that also has definitely happened. But certainly my preference is a medium to long-term relationship.
Mm-hmm. So considering you've had so many experiences as a sacred sexuality practitioner, I'd love to hear from you about a peak experience that you've had within this realm. What comes to mind when I ask you, what's a peak experience you've had while embodying the Dakini?
We, at my energy group, had a teacher come in to teach us a particular modality, a flavor of sex magic. And so we all were running like sexual energy together. I think it was about 16 of us, you know, and my ex-girlfriend and I were not actually in the circle breathing and running the sex energy. We were one bullseye ring out and drumming. We were holding the beat for the working on the inside. And the teacher, I think, was not prepared for how practiced we as a group were in doing stuff like this. Mm-hmm. Because from the outside-ish looking in, it looked very much like he was trying to sort of like keep the energy in the room, and all the energy wanted to do was sort of like spiral up like an ice cream cone and pew out through the ceiling. And so he was like doing everything in his power, sort of like holding a muscle car in place by himself, right? He was like red in the face and having a hard time, and we all sort of had a group energy orgasm. You know, there's people giggling and making ecstatic sounds, and it sounds like a porno. And he taps out. He says, "Okay, that's it. I'm good." And my girlfriend and I, with knowing eye contact, look at each other across the room like we fully know that we're just getting started. And it was like the shaking the dust off orgasm. That was not the big one. Mm-hmm. And sort of 4 or 5 folks just sort of looked at me and were like, "Well, are you going to?" And so I stepped into the center of the circle and took his place. And within a breath or two, I felt the energy sort of coil and whirl around me, and then do the ice cream thing, right? Go ahead and make a little tornado shape and pew out through the roof, and do what the energy wanted to do. I got out of the way and let it do what it wanted to do. And we went on to have, a couple of cascading group orgasms that were ecstatic, and it like blew my mind. I remember seeing, it felt like I tasted colors. It blew any and all psychedelic experiences of my youth out of the water. It was a new high and a new peak experience. And the whole time I was very much in control. I was just breathing and just riding the energy waves around me and letting it go, without going into too much technical detail of what we were doing. But like, I just sort of allowed the energy to do what it wanted to do. And 16 people around me were having cascading orgasms. And right? I could hear color. I could taste, right, sound. It was a I'm having a hard time, synesthetic experience. And I heard sort of like a womp 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 in my ears through some of those cascading orgasms. And then we all sort of came back down to earth, and it was over. And the rest of the afternoon, I kept grabbing people by the shoulders and the ears and telling them God is a sound. So that was my peak experience. Sometimes I use God as a sound man as my signature in my email, because that was how I was grabbing my folks all day for the rest of the day after that. But yes, that is the peak experience that I've had in sacred sex.
Wow, what an incredible experience. And it's amazing that it all happened without sex, right?
Indeed,
Yeah.
right. No, I mean, like, there might have been a rope and somebody might have had a Hitachi vibrator, right? But like nobody was actually, right? People had their clothes on. There was, let me be clear, there were people having sex. Part of the second magic ritual involved two folks being sexually stimulated, sort of in the center of the circle. But that outer circle of 10 or a dozen people, for sure had their clothes on, and were also having climaxes, right? Like sympathetic. Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful. That's such an intense experience. So I'm so curious to hear, what are you excited about exploring next? What's something in your erotic realm that you're looking forward to understanding and exploring more?
Oh my goodness. I am, sadly getting older, and my appetites around how I use the dungeon have changed. I am sort of back to how I showed up in my early 30s, and primarily using it as a social space. A lot of my friends are kinky. A lot of my friends are poly. And so even if I am not particularly interested in BDSM, and that was the space I was for a lot of pandemic when it was unsafe, right? Even if I wanted to play, I understood that it wasn't feasible or socially appropriate to do so, right? And I've sort of phased in and phased out of the community in terms of like dating and cruising and looking for myself in the community. And ultimately I hold out hope that that I'll fall in with the right folks that all sort of like think and feel similarly to me. And I certainly have long-term friendships in the community that are like that. So what does the future of kink look like for me? It probably looks like a casual scening from time to time, and continuing to show up in community to vocalize my opinion and support the spaces that I think are doing good work in and for the community, as well as just showing up to participate and cheer on other people that are, that excite me and that are doing good stuff in Detroit and in kink in general.
Beautiful. I love that. So lastly, if I was to ask you to sum up your sexuality in just one word, what would that word be for today?
Energy.
Love it. So Magdalena, if my listeners want to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
On FetLife, I am Snake's Kin. That is snakes_KIN, the kin of snakes. And that's a good place to start.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank you for being so open and sharing yourself with me and our listeners today, Magdalena.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow and rate the show, as it helps us reach more people like you. The Erotic Realm is also expanding rapidly right now. We're now listened to in 117 countries. If you or someone you know would like to sponsor this growing project, especially if you're based in the US, I'd love to hear from you. Sponsorship inquiries can be directed through my Substack, linked below, or by contacting me directly through my website, psychologyofdesire.com. Thank you for supporting independent erotic psychology. Also, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, I'm always looking for new people to chat to. Head to psychologyofdesire.com to apply. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay perverted.